best legends from Ungoro. So I'm going to be looking at 3 different groups of legends, if you would. First, I'm going to be looking at the best overall legends. So I'm approaching this from the perspective of players that are looking to craft legends, right? So if you are looking to craft a legend, you want a legend that's going to be good now and also probably later, if you're ever going to consider playing Wild. But some of these legends may be higher in the overall ranking than they would be in either Standard or in Wild. That's particularly the case with number 3. It's actually not the case with the first 2. So these, I would say, are the first 3 I'm going to look at are the most safe. I'm using a Krazy ranking system from hsreplay.net, using data from hsreplay.net. And so I'm looking at both the deck win rate and the played win rate. So the card has to be in a deck that works, and it has to be actually useful for you to play the card. So this data is from all ranked play, so it could be that if you get into Legend Plus, then you may see different results. But again, if you're in Legend, you probably don't necessarily need this list anyway. And this is still not an exact science. There are certain effects, particularly discard, which makes the HS replay data kind of messy in that regard. And some specific lists will obviously have higher win rates, so if you find the one list that works for you, then obviously that will be the legend for you. But let's dive right in. The number 1 overall legend from the Ungoro set in both Wild and Standard is, surprisingly to me, actually Sunkeeper Tarim. It has a phenomenal win rate when played in both formats, and it's in a deck that does very well. So I know that the Sunkeeper Tarim list does require work. You know, when I play Paladin, I feel like I have sometimes a really hard time making Sunkeeper Tarim work because you kind of need little minions on the board. But certainly in combination with Muster for Battle, and if you do have a board presence, he is phenomenal, which, you know, is great. Number 2 in both Standard and Wild is Kalimos. Elemental Shaman is in a very good place, and Kalimos is probably one of the best finishers, or certainly capable of providing board stability or healing you. He's a very versatile card. He's great. He's the number 2 legend from this set, basically, period. Surprisingly, and this is where things get more complicated, number 3 is actually Sherazin, Corpse Flower, a card that many people mocked, but at this point I think it's safe to say that he's the overall number 3 best legend. So that's kind of confusing because he's only the number 5 best legend in Standard, and he's actually the number 6 best legend in Wild. But the thing is that the higher tier cards that I'm going to discuss in a moment in each of those formats actually really struggles in the other format. So if you're specifically looking at the long-term value of a card, Miracle Rogue has tended to be in a very good place. It's still good and playable, and Sherazin fits into Miracle Rogue lists. So in terms of overall value, Sherazin, I would say, is number 3. So now that we've looked at the top 3 overall cards, these are the only cards that are really strong in both formats. Now I'm going to look at just the cards that are very strong in Standard. And so that's not necessarily saying they're totally bad in Wild, it's just that there's better alternatives, or the decks you're up against make them a little bit harder to make work. First of these is Fireplume's Heart, obviously a very topical card in Standard. A lot of people are playing this Quest Warrior, and it does really well. It has a 50% played rate in Standard, and it's a 50% deck win rate, so Taunt Warrior is in a really good place in Standard. It tends to fall off in Wild. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's just because Wild, there's a lot more things that can go wrong. So let's look at number 4. Number 4 is King Mosh. So this is actually kind of almost a niche card. Not a lot of people are actually playing it, but those who have King Mosh and are actually playing him in Standard in a Control Warrior deck, he actually does really well. He has a 53% played win rate, so that means when you are playing him, you are basically 3% more likely to win the game. So he is actually the number 4 legend in Standard, despite his relative unpopularity. So now let's look at the top 4 wild legends. So these are legends that do really well in wild, but tend to struggle in standard right now. So the number 3 wild legend is actually Spiritsinger Umbra. A phenomenal 59% played win rate in wild. Definitely the number 3 ungoro legend in wild. Mostly because in wild you have better death rattles. You have Sylvanas. You have Piloted Shredder. You have all these incredible death rattle effects. And so when you actually get Umbra on the board and activate these death rattle effects, you're pretty likely to win the game. Number 4 is actually Unite the Murlocs. And, there's not a huge number of different Murlocs in wild, but, all it takes is that 1/2/4 charge legend that pretty much everyone got for free at one point, unless you're like me and started after that promotional event had ended, unfortunately. But yeah, this Murloc Shaman has a 56% win rate in wild, and this card has a 53% played win rate, which confuses me, but there you are. Number 5 is actually Elise the Trailblazer. Again, it's hard to make a non-taunt warrior, quest warrior work in standard, but in wild, a control warrior actually can do well, and or other control variants that are focused on card advantage, also priests where you can tutor for the packs, so you can get multiple Elise packs. All in all, makes Elise a very strong wild legend. And here we're getting a little bit more to the niche, but we do have Pyros actually coming in at number 7. And if you play with certain numbers, he might actually be number 8. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But he barely makes the cut with a 51% played win rate in wild and a 51% deck win rate in wild. And I think a large part of that is just because there are better elemental neutral minions in wild for mage, which mage has access to. So in standard, you can't get a Ragnaros the Fire Lord off Discover effects or run him in your deck, whereas in wild you can. So that's my theory as to why elemental mage is actually stronger in wild than it is in standard. So I wanted to talk about one more card in particular. So the problem with this data is that one of my criteria is the played win rate. So this is a really big problem, in particular for Clutchmother Zavas, right? Because Discard Lock actually has a 52% win rate, for example, in wild. So it could be that Zavas would really be, above Pyros in terms of win rate. But of course, when Clutchmother Zavas is played, it has a 44% win rate. So when you are actually playing Zavas from your hand, you are losing the game. So it's kind of hard to evaluate because of the type of data I have access to, just how good Zavas is. But I would say it definitely actually could be in the top 10 legends from the set. Some other cards are in decks that do really well, but are not actually necessary to those decks. So this would be, in particular, Swamp King Dread. Mid-range Hunter has like almost a 55% win rate in, and I think standard, but or certain decks that would run Swamp King Dread. But when Swamp King Dread is played, the win rate actually drops to like 50%. So for that reason, basically, it's kind of, again, it's tricky, right? It's not that there's necessarily a better 7-drop. It's that if you're playing a 7-drop in that list, your deck might have already lost. Which, I mean, if your deck just loses when you get to turn 7, maybe you shouldn't be running a 7-drop at all. And I know everyone is ranting about the Caverns Below, but according to the data, it basically has a 50% win rate. It is not in the 51% cutoff for either standard or wild that my discussion here is focusing on. So if you're wondering where the X card is, it's because the win rate in either format for either the played or the deck wasn't above 51%. So there are limitations here, of course, as I've acknowledged, but I hope this is helpful if you are considering which legends to craft from the Ungoro set. Hope this helps, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.